Chapter 576. The answer is, it is fake. At the instant the sword flew out, the sword aura that raged through the entire world swiftly reverberated in the air. As Beeling pointed forward, a black and white glow shot out from the sword and charged towards Su Ming with a howl. "This punch is your punishment for hurting my senior brother." Su Ming's fist crashed into that small sword. A rumbling sound shot through the air, a wave of impact spread out. Beeling coughed up blood once again and took a few steps backwards. As his face turned pale, he saw Su Ming standing in his spot. He did not even budge a single inch. Instead, he unfurled his fist and casually grabbed the black and white small sword. "Beeling, your strongest forte isn't the sword, but the arrow. You don't use swords like this." Su Ming shook the small sword in his grip a little, and his divine sense abruptly rose up to fuse with his powerful will before he sent it charging into the small sword. A shrill sword whistle shot out from the sword, as if it wanted to struggle against him and was calling for its master. However, that sword whistle did not last for more than 10 breaths before it died away, and as Su Ming gave that sword a light wave, it grew to be 3 feet long. As he held the sword in his hand, his comprehension towards swords, which Hong Luo had gained as part of his inheritance as a member of the Immortals' royalty and which Su Ming had inherited from him, emerged in his head. This was a way of wielding the sword. However, Hong Luo himself did not use swords, and that was why he did not practice this skill. Su Ming had also tested it out with the small Virescent sword before, but the sword had been unable to handle this different manner of control. At that moment, as he held Beeling's sword in hand, Su Ming took a step forward and closed in on his opponent in an instant. He swung his sword towards him. Beeling continued retreating. At that moment, his eyes were sparkling as he lifted his right hand to form a few seals before he moved his left hand to seize the afterimages left behind by those seals. A low growl fell from his lips. "Explosion from the crushed seal." As those words were spoken and Beeling relaxed his left hand, a long string of loud rumbling sounds immediately came from in front of him. They sounded like muffled thunderclaps. Turning into a wave of impact, they rushed towards Su Ming. He remained calm. At the instant that impact came towards him, he lifted his left hand and flicked the sword. It started trembling violently, and a piercing hum sounded in the air. The sharp hum turned into a wave of sound that crashed into the rumbling sounds. The space between them instantly collapsed and shattered, turning into a void that could absorb anything. At the same time, Su Ming bit the tip of his left hand. When blood flowed out, he smeared it on the body of the sword, and a murderous aura swiftly rose from it. Holding the sword in his hand, he swung it towards Beeling in a violent lash-like swing, as there were hundreds of feet between them. A hum sounded in the air, and a red glare was flung out of the sword to swiftly strike Beeling in a whipping motion. When he coughed up blood, Su Ming shook his head and let go of the weapon in his hand. A fine crack appeared on the sword. There were few swords in the world that could withstand this extreme vibration caused by that one flick before they turned into a wave of sound and that lash that was as flexible as a whip. Even Beeling's sword had begun sporting cracks. If it had been Su Ming's Virescent sword, that full-force flick would have been enough to make it explode. This art was also supposed to be cast with the 9 transfigurations, 10 transformations, and 1 voice art, according to Hong Luo's inheritance. By then, the effects of this strike would be incredibly terrifying. Once Su Ming let go of Beeling's sword, he lifted his right foot and moved forward, then stomped the ground before him. With that one step, the world rumbled. The clouds above them churned, and the illusion of a huge footprint gathered together before charging towards Beeling with an astonishing presence. A loud bang rang in the air, and Su Ming lifted his foot again. Once he took 7 consecutive steps forward, the clouds in the whole sky started tumbling violently. The banging sounds continued non-stop, and Beeling coughed up fresh blood once again. As he fell back, his hair spilled all over his shoulders, betraying his pathetic state. The cold look on his face was no longer around, replaced by disbelief and dumbfounded shock. Once Su Ming took those 7 steps, he appeared before Beeling, then lifted his right hand and slapped the other's right arm. Rumbling sounds echoed in the air, and Beeling's right arm was torn to bloody pieces, splattering his already gravely wounded body. Su Ming did not stop. He tapped Beeling's left arm, and the man's left arm was shattered, with blood spilling into the air. There was deep gash on Beeling's chest and his arms were a bloody mess. At that moment, his injuries were the exact same as those of Hu Zi. Su Ming lifted his right hand, and as his opponent staggered backwards, he grabbed Beeling's throat. As he looked at this person silently, the complicated look from before appeared on his face once again. Su Ming. An anxious voice called out to him. It was Xianxia. She had traveled to this place without care for anything else. When she saw Su Ming seizing Beeling with his hand, tears fell from her eyes. Beeling also looked at Su Ming, and a broken smile appeared on his face. Su Ming. Su Ming looked at Beeling. This was the first time he heard Beeling saying his name once he woke up. So you still remember me, he stated softly. Su Ming, we bear no ill will. I didn't know you were here. I. Xianxia cried. As she looked at Su Ming, sharp pain stabbed her heart. The two men before her had left incredibly deep memories within her, and she could not forget either of them. We're different from the others. There's no way we could possibly forget you. Xianxia looked at Su Ming. She originally did not think that she would meet Su Ming so quickly in the Berserker's world. She had also thought about all sorts of possible scenarios that might occur when she ran into him again, but she had never expected that they would meet again under such circumstances. You two came from the land of the immortals. Tell me, what was Dark Mountain? Su Ming asked softly as he looked at Beeling and Xianxia. Is Wu La not dead? Is Bai Ling still around? Is Lei Chen well? Where did Elder come from? Yi Wang, Chen Chong, Wu Sen, and all the other people I met in Dark Mountain, are they going to appear in my world one after another? Is the world where Dark Mountain lies true, or fake? He wondered in a mumble. Do you really want to know? The person who answered Su Ming was not Xianxia, but Beeling. He looked at him with a complicated expression on his face as he spoke hoarsely and with great difficulty. Su Ming fell silent. Anguish and loneliness appeared on his face, and he slowly let go of his grip around Beeling's neck. I already know the answer. Both of you, leave. Su Ming turned around and no longer looked at Beeling and Xianxia. He walked towards the 9th summit silently, and behind him Beeling's expression turned even more complicated. Xianxia wept beside him, and as she looked at Su Ming's back, pity appeared in her eyes. Su Ming. We are who we are, but we are also not who we are. Beeling said softly and turned around before moving towards the ship. Xianxia looked at Su Ming and closed her eyes before she left with Beeling. Once these two people landed on the ship, it turned into a long arc and gradually left into the distance. Only the Dead Sea giants in the area continued roaring. The answer is, it is fake. Su Ming said softly while standing on the 9th summit. The sea breeze lifted his hair and covered his eyes. Chapter 577. Seizing Life. Is it important, whether it is real or fake? Su Ming looked at the sea and sky in the distance as he mumbled softly under his breath. Is it important? How could it not be important? Those were his most beautiful memories. That was his Dark Mountain. Those were memories left behind on nostalgia-filled books, their yellowed pages lifted by a gentle, quiet breeze. No, it's not important. Su Ming closed his eyes. When he reopened them after a long while, he felt a little tired. That tiredness did not come from his body, but from his soul. It was like all lamps had been blown out in a buried city. When he extended his hand out, he would not be touching darkness, but would be touching the unfamiliar sights he could not see. He would also be looking at the sun that belonged to someone else, the faces that belonged to someone else, and the dozen-something years of his childhood that belonged to someone else. The memories after he left Dark Mountain surfaced in his head. In the end, they turned into a huge ball of tangled threads that no one could see through, figure out, or unravel. The fatigue that sprouted in Su Ming's heart grew deeper as time passed, and when it filled his entire core, it turned into a hint of lonely desolation. Wind blew past the surface of the sea. The crystalline sparkles on the waves were the result of light coming from the darkening clouds in the sky. That light came from the setting sun beyond the clouds, and it was a charming sight to look upon. In the midst of it all, Su Ming looked as if he was drifting in a sea of memories, as he wrapped his arms tightly around a wooden raft called loneliness. But no matter what, he could not get out of this sea, and he could not bring himself to let go. He stood there, and as his hair was lifted by the wind, it looked as if the strands were dancing to a tune called life. The wind that blew through the gaps between his hair brought with it a sound, and it turned into the saddest song of a Zun in the passage of time. When Biling and Xianxia left, Bai Su woke up from the illusion. The instant her world became clear once again, she saw Su Ming standing and looking at the sea and sky. It was quiet all around them. The old man in white and all the others who had chosen to stand to the left moments ago were all silent. The fatigue in Su Ming's heart was like a quiet song. It spread out, causing everyone to be immersed in that silence, and no one was willing to make any sound to break it. However, no one had any idea who had managed to hear the coda to this song singing about Dark Mountain. It had been a long time since Su Ming cried, but at that moment, tears gradually flowed down his eyes, yet he did not know about them. It was as if he had already forgotten about their existence. Those tears were transparent, but when they trickled down his cheeks, they looked as if they had been dyed by his loneliness, causing them to gain a bitter, astringent taste when they reached his lips. Perhaps everyone's tears are tasteless when they initially flow out, tasting just like the drops of rain that fell from the clouds. Then, as everyone lives through their lives, their tears gradually change, gaining the color of their cheeks, and they would slowly turn bitter. At some unknown point of time, Bai Su arrived beside Su Ming. Her face was a little pale when she looked at him. She lifted her hand gently and wet her fingertips with his tears. "Thank you," Su Ming whispered softly. The warmth of those fingertips that touched his face made him open his eyes. The light from the sunset seeping through the clouds was crimson red. It scattered on the surface of the sea, giving it a brilliant glow while giving the water a muddy look so that they could no longer peer into the sea. This scene was incredibly beautiful. The slender Su Ming, the beautiful Bai Su, the wind lifting their hairs together, and also the heads of the giants that popped up to the surface of the sea all around them. However, the roars from the Dead Sea giants ruined this beautiful scene and broke the silent atmosphere. Their low growls and howls had not disappeared due to Biling's departure. Almost the instant the Dead Sea giants started roaring, Su Ming lifted his hand and seized the air in the direction of the sky gently. But instead of the sky, the sea was the one that moved. The seawater started rotating with loud booming sounds, turning into an incomparably huge whirlpool. As it spun with loud booming sounds, the Dead Sea giants within struggled, but in the end, even their roars were drowned out by the sound of waves. Gradually, the people's gazes became filled with great respect as they looked at Su Ming. There was also a hint of fear within their eyes. Because the whirlpool in the sea was spinning faster with each passing moment, and eventually, under that extreme speed, the wind that was stirred up and the water that was swept into the whirlpool, all turned into blades that could sever bones and cut through flesh and blood. The shrill screams of pain and the giant struggles as they tried to escape were all useless under the whirlpool's spinning. They could only turn into a pool of fresh, red blood, and also pieces of flesh that were ripped off from their bones. Eventually, not a single intact Dead Sea giant could be found on the surface of the sea. When all of them were reduced to crushed bones that filled the red ocean, Su Ming slowly furled his right hand together. At the instant he clenched his fist, drops of blood floated up from the rotating sea. They gathered together to merge into a gigantic ball before Su Ming. Once it formed, the seawater returned to its original color. The souls of the near 100 Dead Sea giants flashed in the ball of blood that floated before Su Ming. Occasionally, they would let out shrill cries that could only be sensed with the mind. The ball of blood looked as if it was boiling. As it continued gathering together, it began contracting and slowly shrinking. Eventually, it turned into an object that looked like a fingernail shining with a strangely enchanting shade of red as it floated toward Su Ming. He lifted his head swiftly. The loneliness in his eyes and the forlornness on his face were hidden in the depths of his heart. What was shown was his usual composure. He lifted his right hand swiftly, and when he swiped his index finger past that condensed blood, it looked as if it got glued to it. It was as if his fingertip had turned into a pen, and he started making stroke after stroke in midair. Su Ming did not know how many strokes he drew in the end, but eventually, a complex runic symbol floated before him. It shone with a bloody glow and exuded an abundant amount of life force. That was the accumulation of all the lives of the dead sea giants. Seizing life. The word seize alone could already mean everything. Su Ming did not know how to tamper with lives, but while he had not completely understood the concept because he had woken up halfway through fumbling about as he continued trying to gain an epiphany through that black wooden block, he still had managed to touch the surface of a passage he had not known in the past. Life. Everyone had different lives. That was the matrix guiding their lives. It was the most brilliant light within a living being. Not everyone could see it, but if it was extinguished, then that life would be forfeit. If that light was changed, then the fate of that life would show a transformation of a degree that could turn the world upside down. This was part of the principles of life. In Su Ming's head, Hu Zi's smiling face appeared, along with his simple and honest expression, and also the figure that had stood like a mountain in defense to the end. I might have a faint inkling of what life is, but I still don't know what life truly means. I cannot tamper with the principles of life, and I can't revive the dead. But since my blood and hair can give life to Sai Ma Xin's puppet, and since my life is such a mysterious existence in Yin Death region, then with my life, I can use other life forces and blood as a lead to let my senior brother recover. Su Ming mumbled in his heart. The runic symbol he drew had been the only thing that had appeared in his head during the entire process of trying to gain an epiphany from that black wooden block, and that symbol had appeared right at the instant before he woke up. It had appeared when Su Ming gained his epiphany, and when it appeared, he had a vague sense of familiarity towards it. This familiarity made him feel as if the runic symbol was he himself. This was the mark that was formed from his principles of life. Su Ming could sense it was not complete, but even so, it still contained his life. Once he drew that runic symbol, the clouds in the sky looked as if they had frozen up and no longer moved. The sea was also mysteriously void of waves. It was as if they had just gained life, and now, they did not dare to show themselves. An incredibly powerful presence of life cultivation spread out from Su Ming's body at that instant. It spread out through the entire area, and right when it surged into the clouds, the thick coverage in the sky faded a little. Gradually, it thinned out greatly, causing the light from the setting sun to shine down even stronger on the spot where Su Ming sat, compared to the other areas around him. Bai Su stared at him with a dumbfounded expression as his hair gradually gained an ancient color. It was grayish-white, a boundless expanse of snow. Su Ming continued drawing line after line, and when he drew his final line, he bit the tip of his tongue to cough up a mouthful of blood. It spilled on the blood-red runic symbol, causing it to instantly possess a spirited air. When Su Ming lifted his right hand, he dragged it along the symbol, which was shining with a piercing light, and took a step towards where Hu Zi lay on the ground. With a step, Su Ming arrived before him. He tapped swiftly on the center of Hu Zi's brows, with the blood-red runic symbol and his own vitality on his right index finger. At the instant he did so, a large number of hair on Su Ming's head swiftly turned white, right from their roots. Hu Zi shuddered, and the runic symbol was left on the center of his brows. As it shone, it looked as if it had branded itself on the man's body and soul. A bloody red shade shone at the center of Hu Zi's brows, then started spreading. When it reached his chest, the hideous gash there was wiped away. The red hue then continued flowing through him, and when it spread to his entire body, the bloody mess that was Hu Zi's arms was repaired to its original state. Snores tumbled out of Hu Zi's mouth, sounding like thunderclaps that shook the sky and earth. Hu Zi's life had not been cut short. He had simply suffered a grave injury that was difficult to cure, and so he had lost all his life force. This sort of restoration was much simpler compared to stealing life from the heavens itself, but it was definitely not something a normal person could do. Only those who walked down the path of life cultivation could completely restore the lives of people with such injuries. Su Ming did not have the ability to change Hu Zi's principles of life, but he could use his own principles of life to provide nourishment for his third senior brother so that he could wake up. Yet no matter what, Su Ming had not truly stepped into the path of life cultivation. He was only lingering about at the door to this path, hence he had to pay an incredible price to cure Hu Zi. However, even if he had to pay an even greater price than this, Su Ming would not have hesitated for even a single moment, because this was Hu Zi. This was his third senior brother. Once Su Ming heard Hu Zi's snores, a faint smile appeared on his pale face. At that moment, as the clouds in the sky continued thinning away, a ray of golden red light shone down through a gap. That light fell on Su Ming's body and illuminated his hair. It was a mixture of black and white now, and also had an ancientness to it that made it look as if it was gray, though it was actually not. The light made it look as if Su Ming was a lone flame which had no home to return to. Or perhaps, it was just unable to find its way there. Chapter 578. Smoke. Su Ming left. When Huzi was safe, still deep asleep though, he chose to leave. Along with him, he brought the bald crane that had quietly turned back into itself from the aquatic dragon. Departure is also a form of longing, which is not strictly limited to being between men and women. There are many times when longing is born due to the friendship between brothers. The 9th summit stood tall above the surface of the sea. At the top of the mountain, a presence that belonged to life cultivation filled a gigantic stone monument. It was something Su Ming decided to leave behind, so it would be an eternal presence that would protect the 9th summit. He was the one who erected that stone monument, and he was also the one who carved the words on it. There were not many, merely a few lines. Kill those who have harmed even a single plant of 9th summit. Kill those who have harmed even a single follower of 9th summit. Kill the entire tribe of the person who harmed even a single disciple of the 9th summit. These 3 lines exuded a great killing intent, as well as a powerful and intimidating air that filled the entire sky and earth in the area. Perhaps this alone would not be enough to intimidate the truly powerful warriors, but the hint of Su Ming's presence belonging to life cultivation contained in those 3 lines of words were enough to terrify even those who had attained great completion in the Berserker Soul realm. It was enough to shock even the immortals. Those words meant that there was someone in the 9th summit who had managed to arrive at the door leading to the path of life cultivation. It meant that this person was one of the incredible people who had managed to truly break through the limits in the Berserker's cultivation method after the god of Berserkers had died. More importantly, those words meant that whoever did things mentioned in them would have to face a terrifying enemy who will exact a burning vengeance that would not wane for as long as he lived. This was a blatant threat, and exactly what Su Ming was feeling. Moreover, he had not just left behind his aura and words on that mountain rock. There was also a drop his blood on it. It could lend life to Sima Xin. It could let Huzi recover. It contained his will, and once it erupted, it could bring out the power of one strike from Su Ming at his full power. Because Su Ming's principles of life were gathered in that drop of blood. That drop of blood was imprinted on the stone monument, but the control over it was in Huzi's hands. With it around, Su Ming would be able to notice if the 9th summit ran into a disaster that was too difficult for them to face. On the day he left, Bai Su stood at the top of the mountain and watched quietly as his figure gradually disappeared from her sight. She liked Su Ming. She had not known about it in the past, but her feelings had only become more deeply engraved in her bones after they parted ways. However, everything had changed. The mirages created by the reflections on the lake were no longer of the moon or the blossoming flowers. As a member of the Bai family, Bai Su had inherited the principles of life that belonged to the river in the sky. She might not have practiced that strange art in the black wooden block, but she had heard many things about it, which was why she knew that all members in the Bai family were bound to be alone for life. This was already set in stone. Perhaps it was possible to change their fate, and perhaps it was not possible. If they tried persisting against their fate, the names that were etched into the Bai family records would die, and their corpses would turn into bloody proofs of the Bai family's life of being part of the river of the sky. The water in the river comes from the sky, and in its loneliness, it would eventually return to the sky as well. Those with this life are bound to be like the flowing water in the river. Especially for those with the life of the stone falling into the river. They would only have a short period of happiness, and would only reflect the colors of the water under the sun for an equally brief moment before they were gone the next instant. Su Ming's departure caused the 9th summit to sink into silence. The protective screen of light around the island appeared once again and continued protecting those within it. Su Ming had no idea who was the one who created this screen of light. He had asked the old man in white before, but he did not know the answer either. He only knew that on the day the disaster arrived and the instant Heaven Gate rose into the sky, disappearing, this screen of light had appeared suddenly right at the moment all the people thought that their deaths were imminent. No one knew why it had appeared. Neither had anyone seen who it was who laid it down. In the midst of the tranquility, The people who had been humiliated by Beeling suppression returned to the 9th summit and found place there. Su Ming did not chase them away, but instead gave them a home. He was also a person without a home, so why should he make things hard for people bearing the same plight? Su Ming left. He walked out of the screen of light and cast his eyes towards the east. That was where Eastern Wastelands was located. As he stood above the Dead Sea, not a single soul could be detected around him. Only the waves from the sea and the moaning winds were his companions, and the loneliness buried in the depths of his heart increased. He flew forward quietly, heading into the distance, towards Eastern Wastelands. The Dead Sea beneath him covered all land. There were several places Su Ming was familiar with that were now buried deep in the depths of the sea, just like this spot. Han Mountain City was buried under the water here, as well as the chains of Han Mountain. A day later, Su Ming stopped calmly in midair. He had not met anyone on his way to this place. It was as if the entire world had died and he was the only one left on this planet. Only the wind and the waves were his companions. Su Ming looked at the Dead Sea beneath him. In his memories, Han Mountain City laid in this area, but he knew that Han Mountain could not be found presently in the depths of the sea. The destruction of the continent was like a mirror being shattered. The distance between the broken pieces of land also differed. The location in his memories was only a recollection. The real place could be anywhere, just not here. If he wanted to search for the place now, then he would have to dive deep into the bottom of the sea and search for it slowly in all directions. All along the way, the bald crane had noticed the dispirited air looming around Su Ming. It did not bother him. Instead, as they flew, its eyes would wander around, occasionally looking towards the sea and everything around it, attracted by everything that shined. 3 days passed by before they knew it. Su Ming did not travel too quickly. As he walked in midair, the scenes in his memories slowly, but surely, started fading, replaced by what he saw now. In time, there were hardly anything left of the past. At one point, he saw a small island on the Dead Sea. They were already incredibly far away from freezing SkyClan. Judging by their current location, they should be close to the border separating the berserkers and shamans in South Morning all those years ago. That island was a lonely existence on the Dead Sea. No screens of light offered any sort of protection, neither were there any other defenses. If no one looked closely during the dark night, they would not be able to notice it. That island was simply too small. Su Ming had seen some of these islands along the way, and none of them contained any signs of life. Dead silence filled them. Even if there were any creatures, they had only been alive in the past, and were now just skeletons scattered around the grounds. Su Ming averted his gaze from the island and took a large step forward, turning into a long arc. The bald crane followed behind him, and at the instant the man and crane were about to fly past the island, Su Ming's body came to an abrupt halt. He whipped his head around, and when he looked downwards again, he was momentarily stunned. A dim light from a fire sparkled like a star in the sky in the midst of the darkness on the island, and it was not just one ball of light. There were about a dozen of them. Joyful laughter could be heard traveling faintly into the air at that moment, and those sounds spread through the area, mixing with the crashing of the waves. Su Ming could remember clearly that there had been no light when he looked towards the island just now. He did not think that any berserker tribe would be able to survive in this sort of island over the past few years on the Dead Sea without any sort of protection. This should not be possible. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He cast his divine sense outward and covered the island, but what he saw within his divine sense was emptiness. There was not a single soul there, but everything his eyes saw seemed so real. In silence, Su Ming charged towards the island. The bald crane fluttered by the side and cast a sideways glance towards the place before following him while mumbling under its breath. After a moment, Su Ming landed on the ground. The sea breeze filled the air, bringing with it the stench of the sea. Besides the dim light, everything else was shrouded in a layer of darkness. With a calm expression, Su Ming strode towards the place with the fire. The island was tiny. Before long, he distinctly saw the light burning in the distance. Clear sounds of laughter rang by his ears, along with the sounds of children playing. Su Ming continued walking, until he saw a tribe before him. He shuddered. This was a small tribe, and there was a simple fence built around it. Bonfires were burning brilliantly within it, and there were male and female berserkers dancing and singing. Children were playing tag by the bonfires, and their bell-like laughter flew clearly in the air. Nursery rhymes could even be heard tumbling out of the mouths of these children as they continued chasing each other, and their young voices filled the entire tribe. They blended together with the joyful looks of the adults occasionally turning their heads to look at their children, causing the nursery rhymes to give Su Ming an indefinable feeling in his chest as they fell into his ears. A flower in blossom for 1,000 years, watches the world change alone as time passes. She watches with a smile for 1,000 years, to find that her beloved is already beside her. As those naive voices sounded, the moaning sounds of a zun also came from a beast skin tent in the tribe. The zun's tune was filled with sadness, but harmonized perfectly with these singing, causing Su Ming to stop walking and just stand outside the tribe quietly. He listened, only listened. He was familiar with this tribe. How could he not be? He came to this place twice in the past. The first time, he had come with his master, Xianxia, and the second time, he came alone. This was his third time. Su Ming had originally forgotten this place. A small tribe like this would not be able to survive through the disaster. Yet now, on this island, in this dark night, in this place where his divine sense found nothing but his eyes saw light burning, Su Ming returned. A flower in blossom for 1,000 years. She watches with a smile for 1,000 years. He mumbled. This was the tribe where the old Zun Maker lived. Su Ming moved quietly into the tribe. The children playing tag did not seem to see him. As they laughed, they ran towards him, and phased right through his body as they continued playing. The people gathered around the bonfire also did not seem to see Su Ming. It was as if they did not exist in the same world as he did. At times, prosperity did not mean living in luxury, but a bustle of activity. In the middle of this bustling atmosphere, Su Ming's loneliness was an emptiness that could not be hidden by the light and smoke around him, no matter how hard they tried. Su Ming moved through the crowd. As he looked at the happy, smiling faces, and listened to the adorable voices around him, he arrived quietly outside the tent from which the sad song of the Zun was coming. After a moment of silence, he lifted the tent flap. Chapter 579. Big Brother La Su. When Su Ming lifted the flap of the tent, a gentle light from a lamp spread out from within. It looked like light beams shining on his body. The sound of the Zun became clearer once the flap of the tent was lifted. An old man sat inside. He held a bone Zun in his hands and had it placed against his lips. His eyes were closed while playing a sorrowful tune. As the notes filled the air, Su Ming felt as if he had been separated from the world. He walked into the tent quietly and sat before the old man. He closed his eyes and listened to the song. His heart soared with the melody, flying to some unknown place. But, perhaps, it was actually just wandering around. Time trickled by, but Su Ming's eyes remained closed. His soul continued wandering about, as if it could not find a place to stay. The bald crane's feathers were all standing on its body, as it remained outside the small tribe. It continued looking around with wide eyes. Terror was evident on its face. In its eyes, this entire area was empty, and besides Su Ming, no other person could be found. Su Ming had sat down in the distance on this vast mass of empty land and had even closed his eyes, occupied by his thoughts. If it was just that, the bald crane would not have been terrified. What caused it fear was the strange power within the island. It was invisible, and made the crane unable to move even a single inch. The entire area should be empty, but it could occasionally hear the sounds of children playing and laughter ringing by its ears. It was as if there was a bunch of children it could not see playing tag around. At times, a cold chill would also travel through the bald crane's heart, as if the playing children had just phased through where it stood. Its beak snapped open and closed a few times, but it could not move its body. It looked at Su Ming, looked at its surroundings, and a wave of fear towards the island stemmed right from the bottom of its heart. Su Ming did not know how much time had passed. The sky was still dark, as if it would never know daylight. The song of the Zun gradually weakened, and when it eventually faded away completely, an old voice reached his ears. "You still came." Su Ming opened his eyes and saw the old man putting down the Zun in his hand. There was a kind smile on his face, and his eyes looked like those of a normal person, but Su Ming knew that he was blind. "You knew I would come, Xianxia?" Su Ming asked softly. This was the third time he had come to this place, and he had gained a different experience each of the previous 2 times. "It's because of your confusion that you are constantly wandering about. That is why you come here." The old man looked over. The smile on his lips was incredibly kindly when he said words that Su Ming could not understand. Su Ming remained silent for a moment before he suddenly asked, "What do you mean by wandering? If you do not have a place in your heart you call home, you will wander no matter where you are." Su Ming's heart trembled. The words reverberated in his soul, causing him to be stunned for a long, long time as he sat there. He did indeed not have a place he could call home in his heart. Dark Mountain was fake, and besides Huzi, the 9th summit was deserted. He had always been wandering in his life. He did not know where his home was, did not know the laws of causality affecting all these things, and neither did he know where the start of this entire cycle lay. "Who are you?" After some time, a brilliant sparkle shone in Su Ming's eyes. "When you know who you are, you will know who I am." The old man shook his head and caressed the bone zun in his hand. His fingers scraped the surface of the zun, creating scratching sounds. That sound echoed in the tent before spreading outside. "You saw what is outside, my child. Tell me, what did you see?" The old man turned his eyes toward Su Ming, but they looked blankly at the tent. "This place doesn't exist. The island is empty. All the members of the tribe outside should be dead. There's a large amount of specters occupying this land, and you should be one of them, Xianxia," Su Ming said calmly. "What you see might not be the truth, and what you believe doesn't exist, might not necessarily not exist." The old man closed his eyes while speaking. Confusion appeared in Su Ming's eyes. That confusion ran deep, filling up his entire heart and surrounding his soul, refusing to leave. "They exist. You saw them, but you refuse to believe. Outsiders cannot see them, and they will be afraid. It is as if thousands upon thousands of people are asleep, but you are the only one who has opened your eyes. You are fortunate, but also unfortunate, because you don't believe in what you see, and because the moment you believe, the world will no longer accept you. Because you will have woken from your slumber," the old man said gently. There seemed to be a deeper meaning to his words, and it caused Su Ming to be uncertain about his words. "Thousands upon thousands are awake, but you are still asleep. Is it because you don't want to wake up, or is it because you believe yourself to be awake? What does it mean to be asleep, and what does it mean to be awake? All of this is just the world you see, and no one else can see it," the old man said slowly. There was an ancient air to his voice, and if anyone heard it, they would feel as if they had just heard time itself. "It is like fate. You can choose to submit to it or to fight against it. It is like life, where moments of joy and sadness exist together. It is like you and I. What I see, you cannot see, and what you see, I cannot see. Do you understand, my child?" The old man opened his eyes and turned his blank eyes towards Su Ming as if he was looking at him as he smiled kindly. Su Ming remained silent for a moment before he lifted his head and looked at the old man. A hint of understanding dawned in his eyes as he said slowly, "If I'm not bothered by my past, then why should I be bothered by my future? If I don't cling to the idea of who I am, then why should I think about who is me? The high winds may be strong, but they cannot extinguish the flames in my heart. Sooner or later, they will set the world ablaze." When the old man heard Su Ming's words, delight appeared in his smile, and a hint of praise even bloomed on his face. "Sooner or later, this world will be set ablaze. This is life. It is not your life, not anyone else's life, but the world's life. Even the word life itself goes through the same fate. Why cling to it? In truth, you still don't understand." The old man smiled. Su Ming fell silent. When you learn who you are no longer you. When you no longer know who you will be you. The old man lifted his right hand, and the bone zun in his hand immediately flew up to float next to Su Ming. "Take it. It will be the guide pointing you back home." The old man's voice echoed in the air while Su Ming looked at the bone Zun floating before him. More accurately speaking, the instrument was a beast's spine, and the surface of it was incredibly smooth. The signs of time could be found on it as well. It will help you fend a disaster you are bound to face in your life. This disaster is about to arrive soon. If you can live through it, then another line will be added into your life, and from then on, it will be difficult for anyone else to control your fate. The old man looked at Su Ming with a smile, then closed his eyes. We've met each other thrice now, but it is as if our meetings were in 3 separate cycles of our lives. The moment you walk out of this tent, I will give you a 3-day-long serendipity to activate the basis for you to build your berserker soul. The old man's voice was hoarse, as it echoed in the air. Su Ming's gaze fell on the bone Zun and he silently took hold of it. When he looked at the old man, a slight hint of confusion appeared on his face. After a long time, when the old man no longer spoke, Su Ming wrapped his fist in his palm towards the old man and bowed deeply. He might not know his name or his origins, but he could sense the wisdom and the ancient air about the old man. After quietly bowing towards him, Su Ming looked as if he had straightened his thoughts a little. He turned around to walk out of the tent. When he lifted the tent flap and was just about to lift his foot to walk out, a shudder suddenly ran through his body, and he looked as if time had stopped for him. He even forgot to place his lifted right foot down. His body trembled. His soul shuddered from what he saw, and disbelief appeared in his eyes. His heart also began racing in his chest at that moment. Because the moment he lifted the tent flap, he did not see the island, nor the black sky, and neither did he see the thick clouds that had covered the moons, much less the waves tumbling about in the sea around. He did not hear the roars of the waves either, and neither did he see the light around him. He did not smell the stench from the sea breeze or the bitter sting of loneliness in the air. The disbelief in Su Ming's eyes made him unable to believe in what he saw, heard, and smelled. He turned around swiftly, wanting to see the old man in the tent, but he only saw emptiness. There was no tent behind him. A 3-day-long serendipity. The old man's words rang again in Su Ming's head. In silence, he closed his eyes, and tears flowed down. He saw clear blue sky, and under that blue sky was a mountain with 5 summits that looked like 5 fingers, the dark mountain from his memories. He smelled the presence of home, heard. Big brother La Su, I found you. So you were hiding here. You lost. Now it's our turn to hide and yours to search. A young voice filled with joy reached Su Ming's ears. Oi. Among the fog in the clouds. Eastern wastelands might share the same sky as South Morning, but the weather in the 2 lands was completely different. The sky above Eastern wastelands was filled with moving clouds and wind, which made it look like the fog had fused together with the sky. Not all places were filled with rolling clouds, though. There were quite a number of them where light would shine on the ground during the day, and from the distance, these scenes were filled with astonishing beauty. The dark clouds and powerful light formed the sky above Eastern wastelands. The Dead Sea filled the area around the Eastern wastelands. The waves roared and surged into the air as if they contained the power to destroy the world, but they could not even shake Eastern wastelands. They could only continue howling and roaring by the edge, unable to cause too much change to the gigantic continent. Ever since the land of the Berserkers was torn apart all those years ago, the Eastern wastelands had become the biggest continent, and also an incredibly powerful existence. At the center of Eastern wastelands was a mountain that towered into the clouds, while in another spot, close to the edge of the continent, located near South Morning, was another important ground. At that moment, the world rumbled, and at the same time, 2 powerful rays of light descended from the endless sky with a presence that was able to cause an endless amount of people to be stunned with shock, and to freeze the circulation of the power in their bodies. One of the 2 powerful rays of light descended on the mountain at the center of Eastern wastelands. At its base were 10,000 people prostrating themselves on the ground in worship. There was a big hall at the top of the mountain. As rumbling sounds shook the mountain, the powerful ray of light, which was about several thousands of feet wide and connected the earth and sky, shrouded the hall.
Chapter 580 di Tian Descended.
The other ray of powerful light landed on a flat plain at the edge close to South Morning. At the instant it touched the ground, it caused the land to shake, and a ring-shaped wave of force made all the Eastern wastelanders in the region, along with all the islanders near the continent, to feel as if tens upon thousands of mountains had pressed down on their bodies. They coughed up blood. Some of them even exploded, unable to withstand this mighty pressure that suddenly appeared. This was the sign of a powerful warrior descending. The appearance of the rays of light shook the entire eastern wastelands and attracted a large amount of attention. It also caught the gazes of all the powerful warriors. It was especially so for a certain presence lying in the east of eastern wastelands. At that moment, a layer of fog that surged into the sky appeared out of nowhere. It swept through the land and spread out with a bang. The fog instantly covered a circular area of 100,000 lees, and as it covered the world, it turned into a huge face that had its eyes fixed on the two pillars of light.
Di Tian.
The human in the fog let out a shocking roar which traveled in all directions at the moment he spoke. The pillar of light at the hall in the mountain, located at the center of eastern wastelands and worshipped by 10,000 people, shone even more brilliantly. As it filled the air, a person descended. His face could not be seen. The worshippers could only see the person disappearing within the hall in a flash. After a moment, the door to the hall swung open abruptly, and a person slowly walked out. It was a middle-aged man, and he had a stern, awe-inspiring appearance. His black hair spilled over his shoulders, and he wore a striking emperor's robe, but he did not wear any crown. His eyes were long and narrow, revealing a murderous aura that could make all those who saw it feel terrified. He walked out slowly, and the moment he arrived outside the hall, he swung his arms, then lifted his head to look at the sky in the distance, and took a deep breath. The long-awaited Yin Death's heir. The moment these words left his mouth, the 10,000 people worshipping at the foot of the mountain put on incredibly respectful expressions as they spoke together, and their voices traveled in all directions in waves. We are the disciples of Great Leaf Immortal Sect. Greetings, progenitor Di Tian. We welcome your clone to the Berserker's eastern wastelands. The booming voices were deafening to the ears. The middle-aged man completely ignored the people showing their respect. He breathed in the air, and slowly, the murderous aura in his eyes grew stronger. A thin layer of fog also spread out from his body. As it surrounded him, it surged into the sky, causing all the clouds above to disintegrate. It created a white pillar of fog that covered a circular area of 100,000 lees and became an incredibly striking existence above eastern wastelands. The man was Di Tian. He was another of Di Tian's clones that had once again landed in the land of the Berserkers after the numerous years since he sent the previous one. Things did not end there. The instant Di Tian's clone descended on the mountain at the center of eastern wastelands and a large amount of people coughed up blood and even died due to the shock they experienced, there was another pillar of light. A shadow descended it in a flash in the plains near the continent's edge. Almost the instant the shadow touched the ground, coming into contact with the ground, the entire plains shattered with a bang. Huge cracks tore through the land, and layers of earth tumbled about before they started sweeping outwards in all directions. Shocking booms became a constant, turning into echoes that repeated themselves again and again. After some time, when they gradually started fading away, the plains were gone, and what appeared in their place was a gigantic pit. It was as if a shooting star had fallen from the sky and crashed onto the ground. The pit covered an area of several tens of thousands of feet. Once the powerful light gradually disappeared, a shadow slowly floated out of the pit. It was a middle-aged man wearing a crown and an emperor's robe. There was a cold and detached expression on his handsome face, along with an ancient air. The emperor's robe gave him a mighty, awe-inspiring air. The moment he floated upwards, he looked towards south morning calmly, and a chilling glare that could freeze heaven itself appeared in his eyes. "Destiny, you can't escape," he stated in hoarse voice. He lifted his right hand and seized the air in the direction of the sky with all 5 fingers. Immediately, an invisible layer of ripples surrounding him swept outwards in all directions. The ripples continued spreading outwards. 100,000 lees, 1,000,000 lees, 10 million lees, and they continued spreading until they covered a small half of eastern wastelands. No one could notice the spots covered by the ripples, and it would not bring about any effect to the living creatures in those regions. However, the ripples had covered most of the land that had branched out of South Morning and was close to eastern wastelands. Unless someone took a big circle around the Dead Sea and landed on eastern wastelands from another direction, then this middle-aged man in the emperor's robe would definitely be alerted to their presence. Moreover, Even if there was someone who truly managed to move around these ripples and land on eastern wastelands, the middle-aged man would definitely be prepared for them with the large variety of methods he had at his disposal. This person had the exact same appearance as the person who landed in the hall on the mountain at the center of eastern wastelands. He was also Di Qian's clone. This time, Di Qian had not just sent one clone to the land of the Berserkers, but two. Di Qian's thoughts could be understood from the spots chosen to descend. The one who landed on the mountain at the center of the land would be used to defend Great Leaf Immortal Sect's branch in this land, and also to fight against the evil Black Fog in the east of Eastern Wastelands. As for the clone who had landed at the edge, close to South Morning, he was clearly there, for one person, and that was Su Ming. This crown-bearing clone looked in the direction of South Morning and moved towards the outer parts of the pit. When he rose to the edge, there were 4 Eastern Wastelands berserkers standing thousands of feet away from him. At that moment, their faces were pale as they looked towards him in shock. There were 3 exploded corpses lying by their side. There were originally 7 of them, but 3 had been unable to withstand the pressure and died. The other 4 had coughed up blood and their entire cultivation base had broken down and collapsed, but they did not die. Di Qian's face was chilly as he looked at South Morning, but there was a frown on his face. During the moment he arrived, he had sent his divine sense sweeping across the land, but he had been unable to discover Destiny's presence or the fluctuations of his qi. He could not find him. After a moment of pensive silence, Di Qian let out a cold harumph and decided to sit down. At the moment he did so, the 4 people several thousands of feet away coughed out blood. Their heads exploded, and they fell to the ground dead. The 7 corpses were all missing heads. Only their bodies remained. Their blood dyed the entire area, causing the place to be filled with a deathly silence. Di Qian did not pay any attention to any of this. He only lifted his right hand to form a seal before he flung his hand outwards. Immediately, the 7 corpses shuddered, and they started crawling to their feet. Once they climbed up, they ripped open their clothes to reveal their chests. An indistinct face of a ghost appeared on each one, and they all looked like they were screaming. The next moment, the 7 corpses stormed towards 7 different directions. Everyone who came later due to their curiosity towards the Pillar of Light all found their heads exploding once they saw Di Qian, and when the face of the ghost appeared on their corpses, they would leave. All of them left in different directions. I'll continue searching with my divine sense. I'd like to see how long you can hide from me. Di Qian closed his eyes and remained still. This was the disaster the old Zunmaker had told Su Ming about. The disaster had already arrived, yet during that moment, Su Ming was still on the tiny island in the Dead Sea. He stood there quietly, as if he had lost his soul. A layer of fog gradually appeared around him, covering his body. It even covered the bald crane, and eventually, once it enveloped the entire island, it looked as if it had disappeared from the Dead Sea. Su Ming stared at the little girl standing before him, hugging a doll in her arms while looking at him with adorable, wide eyes. There was joy on the girl's face, and it clearly showed just how happy she was at the moment. Tong tong. Su Ming stared at the girl before him blankly, and his body shivered. He did not just see this girl, but also saw the incredibly familiar tribe around him that was etched deeply in his memories. Dark Mountain Tribe. The grass, the trees, the houses, everything, and even the familiar air. This was clearly the Dark Mountain from his memories, the place he thought he could no longer return to. That fictitious place. Yet even though he knew it was fake, even though he had seen Beeling and Xianxia and went through all the changes, at that moment, he could not deceive himself. So even though what he saw could not deceive him, it was still the place he longed for dearly, his home. Dark Mountain. He saw Bei Ling standing in the distance, practicing with his bow and arrow. He also saw the tall, towering figure of Dark Mountain's head of the guards, who was teaching his son how to fire the strongest arrow. He saw Xianxia sitting by the side, looking at Bei Ling with a gentle gaze in her eyes. There was a bowl filled with water in her hands, and she looked as if she was about to walk up and hand that bowl over to Bei Ling, who was sweating buckets. He saw Wu La, who had died in his arms as she mumbled Mo Su's name until she breathed her last. This stubborn girl was surrounded by a bunch of children, and she was telling them stories. The lively changes in her expressions and her bombastic words caused them to let out tinkling laughter, and within that laughter was an air of happiness that came from the depths of their hearts. Su Ming also saw Lei Chen. His best friend and brother in all but blood had a dejected look on his lowered head at the moment, as he was being scolded non-stop by a middle-aged woman. Su Ming stared at all of this blankly. He had already forgotten everything. His mind was empty. Tong Tong's words seemed to have gone off into the distance, and he could no longer hear them clearly. Then, he saw two men walking out of a big wooden house. One of them was Dark Mountain's tribe leader, Chen Long. He had a frown between his brows, and looked as if he was troubled by something. The man following behind him was one that had carved himself deeply in Su Ming's memories. Shan Hen. The hunter was just as Su Ming remembered him. He was gloomy and as averse to speaking as ever. When he cast his gaze to his surroundings, his emotions could not be seen on his face, and he was just like a beast that had hid away its presence.